Stealth in video games, the ability to hide from enemies, sometimes get to jump on them, or to stun them, take them out immediately, and just the ability of just going through unseen. There are entire games that are built around this idea, but there are also many games for some reason that will include stealth for the sake of variety in the gameplay, but it won't actually be a fleshed out mechanic, which can lead to frustration. So I'll talk about several instances where stealth is used. First one I mentioned right off the bat is a game where it's built around stealth, which is the Metal Gear Solid franchise, with which I have being from Metal Gear Solid 5, Ground Zeroes, where ideally you want to stealth with this franchise because you don't want to get caught, because alerting the enemies will most likely get you killed from how many will show up, they're probably ill-prepared. So stealth is always incentivized. Keyword, incentivize. Because despite the fact that enemies can show up en masse, you can also take out the enemies if you want to. Granted, you'll be wasting resources doing so, but it is very much possible to just be more of a guns blazing kind of person when it comes to Metal Gear Solid franchise, especially the further you are when it comes to the entries, because the controls get better and better for combat, and since there are boss battles, the combat has to be good, which means that it becomes easier to just fight your way to situations than actually be pure on stealth. The footage I have a section where I try to do things stealthily completely, which was the latter half of this video with the footage I got, but for the most part, I got caught and just decided to immediately go guns blazing, shooting every single enemy I saw and immediately killing everyone, and it worked. It completely works. At some point, enemies will lose you, especially getting down so many of them, and the game can't spawn anymore. So it is still a valid tactic, even if it's not stealthy, and the games kind of generally don't want you going around killing the NPCs you're up against, but it is a very valid tactic when it comes to it, which makes some question the stealth aspect if it can be avoided. Granted, there are many instances in Metal Gear Solid where getting caught will lead to potentially an instant game over one way or another, but for the most part, it'll just alert the enemies, and you can pretty much gun your way out if you so choose. But again, the downside is the sheer amount of resources you will be wasting in the process, and resources, especially in earlier Metal Gear games, is generally precious, so there is that aspect of the drawback of trying to gun your way through. Now for a polar opposite, the spin-off Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, which is primarily an action game where stealth is an element but not exactly the main focus, where you can do stealth attacks, but it's generally very awkward when you need to either get right behind the enemy awkwardly or do it from above, but the prompt may not show up when you want it to, so it is a bit awkward. There is an optional campaign themed around stealth with the character of Blazblue you can play as, which was originally DLC when the game came out on PS3 360. So there is a character based around stealth where it is easier to do things stealthily with Blazblue as opposed to actually going in trying to be more so on the assault. It is possible, you can do it, but stealth is the easier option for Blazblue. And remember when this game was new, people actually bashed this game because the stealth elements weren't up to snuff because, well, people, I guess, expected every Metal Gear game to be stealth-based, even though this game is primarily an action game. They wanted to go in blazing, they wanted to go in doing a whole bunch of cool freaking sword tricks, and the fact that people couldn't handle the idea for some reason of a Metal Gear game being primarily more action-based, despite the franchise having tactical espionage action on the boxes, despite this one has namely lightning bolt action. So it was weird complaints to see, but Metal Gear Rising, its stealth elements are very much leave a lot to be desired, but that's not the game's focus. So bashing the game specifically for the mechanic when it's not exactly necessary or the main focus does feel weird when people do that. Next is a game that for years I constantly saw get berated for its stealth sections, this being Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. Where there are segments where Dracula will turn into a rat in order to avoid detection from certain enemies. These enemies will obliterate you on the spot with their weapons if they see you, so you have to sneak by them. And for years people complain about them, and even the devs admitted it would be a controversial decision to put in the game, but it's also why they're simplified and there's not a whole lot of it in the game because of the main focus. but it's still a mechanic that's way more puzzle based than it is stealth, because you see like the patterns and how the enemies move, like, oh, this is about trying to figure out the puzzle rather than the idea of being a truly stealth section. And people get frustrated, especially since you do have the option to possess the enemies and kill them, but if you do so, the game will just spawn another one and take their place. Some people felt like they never got the gratification of being a full-powered Dracula who gets to kill these enemies for how annoying they've been throughout the entire game. But that's a kind of responsibility, especially when you can kill them. Like I said, the game will just spawn more. There is also a section where very powerful enemies looking for you to stealth around, but that section can be trivialized thanks to the ability to turn to mist. So that section is very weird to have a whole stealth section and then have a boss that's trying to look for you, but you can easily just make yourself vanish. So that's a weird aspect, but it is something that people will generally bring up in Shadow 2. If anything, maybe the only thing they bring up. People constantly hate these stealth segments in the game because they feel they don't belong. The game is trying to be an action game, so why have these stealth segments if they don't belong in the game? Once again, like I said, many developers put their stuff in for variety, but since, it's not a game where you can, kind of see the cone of vision what enemies looking at, and the fact that getting caught is pretty easy, so the fact you're trying to figure out where to go next, it can make dying very easy, which will frustrate people, so I can get why they can put up all those Shadow 2 stealth segments, even if I feel like they're not actually that bad when you actually play them. This is a big one that people complain about, the stealth segments in Judgement and Lost Judgment. Speaking for the first Judgement game, it's the tailing missions, with the issue not being that they're difficult or anything, it's just the fact that they take so long and are uninteresting to do, and you have to, like a stealth mission, avoid detection, with there being several places where you can try and hide yourself or blend in with the environment to avoid being seen. But it's the fact that some missions later on take so long for you to tail the enemy that it just gets boring. It's just not an interesting mechanic at all to really add to the game, even if it's trying to add this whole detective aspect of tailing your target in order to see what they're doing. So it makes sense with the game's whole entire detective style, but gameplay wise, just not an interesting thing to do. Now, cut to the sequel, Lost Judgment, which its bigger focus are full of stealth sections where you sneak past enemies. And there are moments where this can be awkward because I swear there are times where I use the distraction tools and the game just decides to go nope. There are some times where the pathway forward may not be fully clear either, leading to getting detected. And the main issue, the main reason people hate these segments is that being detected is an instant failure, and it's also the idea that Megami is essentially being immediately taken down by these generic enemies that he would normally be able to easily defeat in combat, so the idea that now you're just instantly being knocked out feels heavily insulting, because why are these enemies that should have no business manhandling Megami suddenly able to? The DLC, the Kaito Files, did update these stealth sections where you can sacrifice some of your HP in order to avoid being attacked by knocking out the person who saw you, which I feel would have been a greater compromise for the main game. The fact that in the main game, the stealth section of enemies, they're probably way more close together, so Megami trying to knock someone out would probably be more noticeable than the Kaito Files, where enemies are more spaced out, so you can get away with having a KO'd body on the ground. Next up, so I've been talking about it recently anyway, the Boktai series, where they have stealth elements in the gameplay, and in the first game does have points where it requires you to do things without being caught, specifically defeat enemies without being caught, with these stealth elements allowing you to pretty much knock on the wall or get enemies' attention, or also get back attacks which deal extra damage, and you can even stun enemies entirely. You just make little shots with a solar gun. So there are elements of stealth in the gameplay. When it comes to enemies don't get detected segments, that could be an issue because despite being a solar gun, you still need to make line of sight. And the issue with that is you don't really know what the full line of sight of the enemies are, so you can end up being in the line of sight despite it looks like you're not, which can be annoying. There are also some challenges, especially one late in the game, that constantly has the game spawning in more enemies if a certain button is pushed, meaning trying to take them out without getting caught, but also making sure the button isn't pushed by either you or the enemy, can potentially just have more and more spawn in, which can feel so awkward. But like I said, the points where you have to not get caught are generally very rare challenges, but it just has a problem because of many games, the aspect of if you get caught, you are immediately given a game over, which is the issue people have when it comes to stealth segments in games that aren't built around stealth. Like I mentioned before, how Metal Gear Rising or Metal Solid 5, or Metal Solid General, will generally have enemies show up, it'll set in backup, but in a game that instantly gives game over, it can be more annoying because generally people don't really like do or die sections of the game, so having that be the constant punishment when it comes to these kind of games can feel overly punishing, and in the case of I don't want to do this anymore, which is a problem when it comes to trying to add a stealth element to your game. Another franchise that generally has stealth elements that also feel like they have no business being there, the Legend of Zelda franchise, with entries like Ocarina of Time having stealth sections where if you're caught, you're just immediately thrown out, which honestly isn't a lot of progress lost, but if you keep getting caught, it can feel annoying in that sense, especially since you don't really know the full line of sight for the enemies. I know that later in the game with the Gerudo Fortress, you can knock out the enemies, but you don't know how long the stun state lasts, and sometimes they can get back up before you even expect it, and you get caught and thrown back out. So that one said not much progress is lost for doing that, and with the way you make progress in those sections, you don't honestly lose that much when you do get caught because you keep the progress you made, since in that context you're saving hostages. So honestly, it ain't that bad. Majora's Mask, however, is where they do try to make some improvements, like the Deku Scrubs have a visible line of sight so you know where they're looking, which is great. The issue is they don't keep that for the Pirate's Fortress, where you have the same issue of being thrown out and not knowing line of sight. I know many people who play Majora's Mask are probably saying right now, but you can get the Stone Mask to basically make Link invisible in this section, completely trivializing it. That is true, but if your solution to a stealth segment is to completely remove any and all challenge of it, why have the stealth segment at all? Why even put it in the game at that point? So you also have that aspect when it comes to the stealth segments. There's also stealth segments in also Skyward Sword, which I have this one little snippet, but it's a segment you have to do a trial in order to get all these freaking orbs. And instead of getting it's the game over when you're caught, instead these guards will all start beelining it towards you. So you raise an alert, and if they hit you, then you're punished by having to redo the entire trial. So getting caught is not an immediate failure, it just means you better get your butt moving. Which some will probably say is more preferable to an instant game over state, because a person has a second chance, especially since the game is not thinking around stealth. And honestly, I feel like that kind of idea pretty much works better than other games where it's an instant failure or you get booted out of the level. Even like I said for Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, getting booted out isn't all that bad since you still keep the progress you made. It's not as if you're restarting the entire section from scratch or anything. Another one I mention is stealth segments in RPGs, because that is also not something associated with stealth in the slightest. But it makes off the top of my head would probably be Persona 5, and its stealth sections that generally if you get caught, it'll raise the alarm. If the alarm goes to 100%, then you immediately get booted out of the palace, which basically wastes the entire day. But the stealth is very forgiving since it's not primarily a stealth game. So you can generally see how the enemies walk, where they generally walk in straight lines, making it predictable, and you have the hiding spots that are very lenient, and they come up against you while being in a hiding position. So it is a very lenient way of handling stealth. So because, well, it's not its primary focus, which is probably for the better than making a game that's not primarily stealth. But I mentioned the penalties of, oh, the alarm gets raised, get booted out, or also they start the battle at a disadvantage. That only applies to the original version of Persona 5. The re-release, Persona 5 Royal, made some changes where you don't get booted out at 100%, meaning the only penalty to raise the alarm is the fact that more enemies will spawn. But since eliminating enemies is how you reduce the alarm, it kind of as a real bad thing. And if you do get smashed by an enemy, you actually start the encounter blocking, which is something not in the original game. Which means that you basically start still at an advantage because your character started blocking. It means you're gonna pretty much avoid the first hit, and the main advantage for getting caught, the disadvantage for getting caught, is that enemies get the first turn. But the first turn is being wasted on reduced damage, while your party is still doing full damage. Granted, you can't do something like Baton Pass, but like, trying to fight Roy, you don't need it. You don't really need it because of your enemies. So the penalty for getting caught basically becomes almost nothing. There's almost no downside to being caught in the game, which is a very weird decision to pretty much having a re-release, where your stealth elements now went from, okay, it's simple because it's not the main focus, to, oh, why even have it? Why even have the mechanics at that point? So it's a very weird decision when it comes to how they want to handle Stealth of Chapter 5 with the Found Thieves theming, but then feel like they pretty much backtrack so hard that they might as well never had the mechanic in the game at all. Last thing I'll mention is also a genre that people generally really think of put a stealth segment with, and that is platformers, or at least action platformers, with in this case Castlevania Order of Ecclesia having a stealth section in Prison Island where getting caught in the spotlights will spawn in a powerful enemy that you'll basically be unable to defeat, with your incentive being to run. Although in this case, the way forward isn't blocked off, so you can just run forward if you want to, but it's still rated as a stealth segment in this game, especially since Order of Ecclesia is generally put in relatively high regard, while Shao 2 gets bashed for its stealth segments, but Order of Ecclesia still has them and probably has even less of a reason to have them, considering it's a Metroidvania game. Well, kind of. It's half a Metroidvania game. I explained more in the review I made on it. But it is one of those aspects that people don't really bring up when it comes to stealth in Castlevania, the fact that Order of Ecclesia has this. And next up is Mega Man X8, which has a mission, or mission level, that has stealth sections. Granted, your punishment for being caught is just reinforcement coming and dealing with them. So to be honest, like I said, the penalty isn't that bad. It's not an instant game over state, which is generally what people have an issue with stealth in a stealth game, but it's one of those things where you're playing action platformer and now you have to try and not get caught. Which, like I said, you could just get caught dealing with the reinforcements because nothing really stopping you from doing that, especially in a game that focuses way more on the action, since there are segments where you just do fight and also enemies. So honestly, it's more par for the course when you get caught. It's kind of like Metal Gear Rise of Vengeance from I mentioned earlier, where getting caught just means fighting enemies, and with the combat being entertaining, you probably want to do that over actually trying to be stealthy. But it's still a case of adding a stealth section in a game that generally isn't built around stealth at all, or trying to make its own main gameplay priority. So there is that one time weird aspect when it comes to stealth in games. The fact that genres who don't expect to have stealth could just be like, hey, it's a stealth mission, because why not? So that's what I want to ramble about when it comes to stealth in games, that generally some games can be built around them and stealthize it. Some games can just have them for the sake of having them, but they're not exactly fully fleshed out. Granted, I've seen some argue whether or not stealth games are their own genre, to which I say yes, because why didn't I mention it? There are many games out there that are built around stealth. I know I've had Split Yourself fans tell me that the stuff that I do in Metal Gear would not fly at all in Split Yourself, where getting caught is basically a death sentence unless you manage to just hide yourself. So Split Yourself to be the answer of trying to pretty much getting caught doesn't mean it's the game over, but you basically need to do something quickly, otherwise you are screwed. So there is a whole other aspect when it comes to stealth games, because just look at that. I've also been currently playing Assassin's Creed Shadows recently, and that game has this thing where getting caught just alerts the enemies, sometimes not a lot of enemies come by, or you can still fight your way out of it with the enemies coming after you. So combat is still an option, even when playing as Naoe, whose proficiency is not combat, her main thing is stealth. So it feels weird, I can just find my way through them. Granted, it's not advised at all, because it's not her strong suit. Granted, a game where level difference means she can't even immediately assassinate people sometimes. That aspect still feels weird about the game. The whole entire level difference means now I can't immediately just take them out. That still feels weird. But that's kind of what they asked for stealth, where I'm not in a section that was like, oh, game over if you're caught. It's only been, oh, if you're caught, try to run away, or you can try to fight your way out, but you'll probably only be able to fight a few people before going down. So, run, hide, regroup, rethink your positioning, and then try and go again. So even in a game with Assassin's Creed that's generally thin around stealth, getting caught usually just means backup arrives. There are some times I know in earlier entries where getting caught can mean game over, or getting caught can just immediately fail your mission. If I had to go reaffirm it, I think that's the only thing in the first game, where getting caught can just pretty much boot you out of a mission. But there's a entire aspect of Assassin's Creed, which is primarily known as a stealth franchise. Granted, I know ever since the third entry or so, it became easier to just spam the counter and kill enemies due to how the combat was made. So, Assassin's Creed is not perfect either. So that's one ramble when it comes to stealth. I almost want to ramble about stealth sections in games that are not built around stealth, and the varying ways they generally end up coming out and generally end up frustrating people from what I've seen. That's all I want to say. That is all. Play games.